One of the things that I think a lot of us struggle with these days is this whole thing about smartphones for teens.
Right.
It's such a it's such a tricky area, right? Like we want them to be connected, we want them to kind of, be in the loop with their friends and all that good stuff.
Hmm.
But we also want to make sure that they're safe and that they're, not overusing it. And so there's these two new phones that we want to dive into today and kind of see what they're all about and what they tell us about kind of this evolving relationship between families and technology.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, these two phones kind of represent two very different philosophies when it comes to teenagers and technology.
Yeah, I'm seeing that just from the kind of the marketing materials alone.
Exactly.
So I guess let's jump in, and then the first one we'll talk about is the HMD X1.
Uh-huh.
And this one was just announced at MWC 2025. And the thing that jumps out at me right away is that it really seems to be targeting those parental concerns that a lot of us
Yeah.
have. When we think about like, oh gosh, are they going to be spending too much time on it? Are they going to be seeing stuff they shouldn't be seeing? Uh, things like that, all that stuff that kind of keeps us up at night.
Mm-hmm.
So they've packed this thing with features like customizable app and internet access, location, tracking safe zones.
Mm-hmm.
You name it, it's got it all.
It does. And what I find interesting is that the parental controls on the HMD X1 are really quite granular. It's not just like an on or off switch.
Right.
Parents can actually go in through an app on their own phone and block specific apps. They can set time limits for, internet usage
Oh, wow.
and even get alerts if their child tries to access restricted content. So it really gives parents quite a lot of control.
That's a lot. I guess I'm kind of curious from your perspective, like how do you see that impacting a teenager's sense of independence?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because on the one hand, these features can be really valuable for, peace of mind for parents being able to, locate their child in an emergency.
Right.
But it's also really important to think about, that teenager's perspective, like, being
Yeah.
constantly tracked, knowing that your parents can see everything you're doing online, that could feel pretty stifling.
Yeah, like Big Brother is watching you.
Exactly. And I think it really highlights the importance of communication,
Hmm.
like having open conversations with your teenager about these features, why they're being used, what the boundaries are.
Right.
Because ultimately, it's about finding a balance, between protecting them and respecting their growing need for autonomy.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot to think about with the HMD X1. It's definitely an interesting approach.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Lightphone 3 now.
Okay.
And this one is kind of fascinating because it's not specifically marketed towards teenagers, but I think some of the things they've done with it kind of make it, appealing to that age group in a
Okay.
way, but also to parents who are, concerned about some of those things that we were just talking about with the other phone. And so one of the things that jumps out at me right away is the design. It's very minimalist.
Right.
It's almost got like a retro feel to it. Black and white screen, clickable wheel for navigation.
Right.
It's very different from, your typical smartphone.
Yeah, I think they're really going for that intentional kind of less is more approach.
Right, exactly. And I think that could be really appealing to some teens.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. It's different.
Right.
It's not like everybody else's phone, and yet it still has, some of those features that they would want, like 5G and NFC chip for contactless payments.
Yeah.
They even threw in a flashlight for, those late night reading sessions.
Right, exactly. And what I find really interesting about the Lightphone 3 from a parent's perspective is the focus on repairability.
Oh,
They've designed this phone so that the battery, the screen, even the USB port can be easily replaced by the user, which, is fantastic for the environment.
yeah.
Less e-waste,
Yeah.
but also potentially, lower repair costs over the lifetime of the phone, which I think a lot of parents would appreciate.
That's a good point. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because I'm seeing kind of a trend here. Like we've got these two phones that are approaching this whole challenge in very different ways. One is about parental control. The other one is more about encouraging mindful tech use through design.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to get your take on that. Like, is one approach inherently better than the other? Or,
It's a tough one. I think it really comes down to the individual teenager and the family dynamics.
right.
Some teenagers might really benefit from having those more structured boundaries, knowing that, okay, I have this much time for this app and these are the things that I can and can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas others might thrive with a device that encourages that self-regulation, that kind of like mindful use from the get-go.
Right.
So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's more about, parents having a clear understanding of their own values and goals when it comes to their teens' technology use.
Hmm.
Are you looking for that peace of mind knowing that you can monitor their activity? Or are you more focused on fostering that digital well-being and a healthy relationship with technology?
Right. It's about what you're comfortable with as a parent
Yeah.
and also what you think is going to be most effective for your child.
Exactly. And I think it's encouraging to see that companies are starting to address this challenge in more nuanced ways. It's not just a one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
Right.
There's a recognition that, teenagers are different, families are different, and there needs to be a variety of options available.
Yeah. And I think, as we wrap up here, it's important to kind of step back and remember that this whole conversation around kids and tech
Yeah.
is becoming so much more complex and nuanced. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just about keeping them safe online anymore. It's about, helping them develop healthy tech habits,
Hmm.
become responsible digital citizens,
Hmm.
and navigate this increasingly, complex digital world that we live in.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, these conversations with our teenagers become so important. It's not just about setting rules and restrictions. It's about having those open dialogues about, what it means to be a good digital citizen. What are the potential risks and benefits of technology, and how can we use it in a way that's both, enjoyable and productive?